Most people never reach their first $100,000 in investments. And the crazy part is, it's not because they don't earn enough. It's because they stop right before things finally start to work. Because there is a phase in this process where everything feels really slow, where you're doing everything right, you're saving, you're investing, and yet nothing really seems to move. And that's the moment where people start doubting everything. They start thinking, is it even worth it? Does this actually work? Or they start spending the money again, because at least that gives an immediate reward. And that is exactly why so many people never build a real investment base. Not because they couldn't, but because they step out of the process when it still feels like nothing is happening. And if you look at the data, that becomes very clear. The Federal Reserve data shows that a large part of the population doesn't have meaningful retirement savings at all. And only a minority feels like they are actually on track. So this is not a rare situation. This is exactly where most people get stuck. And that's also why experienced investors often say that your first $100,000 is the hardest to reach. Not because that number is magical, but because this is the phase where patience is tested the most. And once you understand why it happens, you begin to see why reaching that point can completely change the trajectory of your financial life. Because when people hear about investing, they often expect to feel the result fairly quickly. But that's not what it looks like in the beginning. Let's make it real for a second. Imagine you invest $800 a month. After 1 year, you've put in $9,600. If your investment grows at around 8%, your total might be somewhere around $10,000 to $10,400. So yes, there is growth, but let's be honest, it doesn't feel impressive. You did all the work, and the system added maybe a few $100s. After 3 years, you've invested roughly $28,800. Your portfolio might be around $31,000, maybe a bit more. Again, the progress is real, but most of it still comes from you. And that's the part people don't expect, because compounding is already there, but the base is still too small for it to matter. Now fast forward a bit. Let's say you stay consistent for 10 years. You've invested around $96,000 of your own money, and now your portfolio might be somewhere around $140,000. Now something starts to change, because that extra $40,000 to $50,000 didn't come from your work. That came from the compounding. And this is the shift most people never reach, because in the beginning, the compounding is still weak. But the truth is, it's not weak at all. It's just still small. And once that base becomes large enough, the exact same return percentage starts producing results that actually matter in your life. And when you reach that point, the 100K portfolio, congratulations by the way, where things start to feel very, very different. Let's go back to that same example. You're investing $800 a month. That is $9,600 a year coming directly from your effort. Now imagine your portfolio has reached around $100,000. With an average return of 8%, that portfolio is now generating about $8,000 a year on its own. So for the first time, you can actually put those two numbers next to each other. You, $9,600 a year, your money, $8,000 a year. And that's where something clicks. Because up until this point, almost everything came from you. But now your money is almost keeping up. You're still putting in the same effort, but suddenly you're not alone anymore. And the bigger that portfolio becomes, the faster that balance shifts. Let's move it forward. At $200,000 invested, that same 8% return becomes $16,000 a year. Now look at the numbers again. You, still $9,600 a year. Your money, $16,000 a year. Now your money is doing more than you because of the system you built. It finally has enough scale to take over part of the work. And this is the moment where you start to feel the snowball. Because even if you don't increase your monthly investment, your total still grows faster every year. The system is no longer depending on you, it's starting to support you. And that's exactly why that first $100,000 matters so much. Not because it's a magical number, but because it is often the point where your effort and your returns finally meet. And then your returns begin to take the lead. This is where things start to accelerate. Not because anything fundamentally changes, but because the numbers finally become large enough for the same system to produce very different results. Let's keep using that same example. At $200,000 invested, your portfolio is generating around $16,000 a year at 8%. Now move that forward. At $300,000, that becomes $24,000 a year. At $500,000, you're looking at roughly $40,000 a year. And suddenly, those numbers start to look very different from the early years. Because now, your investments are not just supporting the system, they are driving it. Let's put that next to your own effort again. You're still investing $800 a month. That's still $9,600 a year. But now your money, $40,000 a year, and you, $9,600 a year. You are no longer the main contributor. And that's the part that changes everything. Because from this point on, time becomes your biggest advantage. The longer you stay in the system, the faster it grows. Not because you're adding more, but because the base keeps getting bigger and bigger. And this is also where people start to underestimate what's possible. Because if you take that same system and you give it enough time, those numbers don't just grow, they start compounding on a scale that feels almost unrealistic compared to where you started. The difference between 100,000 and 200,000 feels slow, but the difference between 500,000 and 1 million often happens much faster than people expected. And that's the nature of the snowball. In the beginning, you are pushing it, but once it has enough size, it starts moving on its own and picking up speed as it goes. And this is exactly why the early years matter so much, because everything that happens later depends on the base you were willing to build when it still felt slow. And this is where things start to mean something very different. Because up until now, everything we talked about was still about you. Your income, your savings, your investment, your progress. But when that snowball keeps growing over time, it stops being just about you. Because what you're building here is your legacy. Not in some abstract way, but in very real things. Because if you keep building long enough, you are creating assets that can do things even when you're no longer there. That could mean a house that is fully paid off, so your children don't have to start their lives with rent or a mortgage hanging over them. It could mean an investment portfolio that generates income so they have a financial buffer from day one. It could mean helping them go through school without starting their adult life with years of debt. Or simply having the ability to support them when something goes wrong without everything collapsing financially. These are real differences because now they are not starting from zero. They are starting from something you already built. And that changes the trajectory of a life. Because instead of spending the first 10 or 15 years just trying to get stable, they can start building earlier. And if they continue that same process, then what you started doesn't stop with you, it grows further. And that is how one generation can change the direction of the next one. Not by removing all struggle, but by removing the need to start from nothing. If you made it all the way to this point, I really want to thank you for being here, because these ideas, they don't change your life overnight, but over time, they can completely change the direction of it. If this helped you see money differently, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Because in the next series, we're going to look at something just as important. Not how wealth is built, but the realities that most people never talk about. And in the first video, we're going to break down something that surprises a lot of people. Why so many lottery winners end up losing everything. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.